Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. April 22nd, 2025. The time is 6 p.m. This is Committee of the Whole. We have 6 of us around the bench. It looks like our first item to do is the adoption of the agenda. It also appears that previous item 5B, the extended producer responsibility update, has been requested to be removed from the agenda. So with that, can I ask for a motion to accept the agenda as amended? Councillor Nagel.
I so move.
Okay, all in favor? And that is approved. Our next section here is adoption of previous minutes. Can I ask for a motion to accept the minutes of April 7th, 2025 Committee of the Whole as attached? Councillor Flowers.
I move to accept the minutes of April 7th, 2025.
Thank you. All in favor of that? And approved. Okay, we have no delegations tonight, so we're on to business 5A, the Bow River Strategy. Can I call Michelle Delorme, Director of Parks and Active Living, to the podium to begin her presentation, please? Hello, Michelle.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Mayor and Council. This evening I have Lee Giddens with me from Urban Systems. So she was the consultant that helped build this strategy for us. So we're here presenting the draft Bow River Strategy this evening. It's a long-term framework designed to guide the protection, enhancement, and activation of Cochrane's riverfront corridor. This version of the strategy reflects extensive research, community engagement, and collaboration, and we're now at a key moment in the process. Today's presentation is an opportunity for Council to review the draft, ask questions, and provide feedback. Following today's discussion, we will refine the document based on Council's input and return on May 12th with a final draft for consideration and approval. Our goal is to ensure this strategy is not only visionary, but also practical, actionable, and aligned with Cochrane's priorities, so your feedback at this stage is both welcomed and essential. The Bow River Corridor is one of Cochrane's most treasured natural assets, but it's facing growing pressures. As our population increases and recreational use expands, the riverfront is experiencing strain. With limited infrastructure and fragmented management, we risk unintentionally harming the very qualities that make this space so special. Right now, decisions are happening in isolation without the coordinated approach needed to protect and elevate the corridor. The Bow River Strategy is designed to change that. It offers a unified vision to guide thoughtful, sustainable growth while safeguarding the corridor's most sensitive and valued features. The strategy is a guiding document intended to inform town policy, future investment decisions, and shape how we interface with the riverfront. It provides a clear and collective vision of Cochrane's aspirations for the corridor. More than just a plan, it's a call to action. It's one that brings clarity, collaboration, and intention to how we shape the riverfront. This strategy equips us to build a river corridor that is resilient, inclusive, and deeply connected to our community, ensuring it remains a source of pride and well-being for generations to come. The Bow River Strategy sets out to achieve a series of clear, interconnected goals that reflect both the community's priorities and the realities of growth. It emphasizes a collaborative approach to planning and implementation, ensuring projects are phased, coordinated, and supported by a wide range of partners. At its core, the strategy is about protecting the natural environment through strong stewardship, while also recognizing the river's corridor's role in shaping local identity and supporting economic opportunity. It aims to create stronger links between the river and the surrounding amenities, improve the function and purpose of pathways for everyday use and gathering, and elevate the design of public spaces to ensure they're inclusive, welcoming, and distinctly Cochrane. These efforts work together to create a resilient and vibrant corridor that contributes to the health, well-being, and prosperity of the entire community. So to ground the strategy to both current conditions and future potential, we began with comprehensive data collection across 9 distinct areas of the Bow River Corridor. This included a river access impact study, an environmental review, examining recreational use, ecological sensitivity, species at risk, and the impacts of informal access points. A robust policy and background review helped us understand how existing town and provincial plans, like Envision Cochrane and the Open Spaces Master Plan, already recognize the importance of the river, but also reveal gaps in connectivity, infrastructure, and environmental protection. This work was further supported by a market opportunity scan, which has assessed how the corridor could support economic growth while maintaining its natural character. It identified potential for small-scale and experience-focused uses such as multifamily housing, boutique accommodations, cultural spaces, and amenity-based retail like cafes and seasonal vendors. It also highlighted tourism opportunities that centered around river-based activities like kayaking, paddleboarding, and guided eco-experiences, and emphasized the need to enhance visitor offerings while preserving Cochrane's Western charm. Together, these insights provide the foundation for a strategy that is grounded in evidence, responsive to the market and community needs, and focused on long-term sustainability. To build a clear and community-driven vision for the Bow River Corridor, we paired engagement for the strategy with the Parks Culture and Active Living Master Plan. This helped reduce engagement fatigue and ensured a cohesive experience for residents engaging with anything related to parks, culture, and active living. Through this process, we reached over 2,000 participants, and in the early stages, we hosted a walk shop with council and town administration along the corridor. The momentum continued with a series of targeted workshops, including sessions with the Parks and Recreation Committee to explore key themes and test early directions. We also conducted individual interviews with core community groups who actively use the area, including Cochrane Tourism, Cochrane Environmental Action Committee, Cochrane Paddlers, by Cochrane, Big Hill Springs Preservation Society, and Bow Valley Habitat Development. Across all of this engagement, we consistently heard the desire to protect the natural environment while enhancing accessibility, safety, and community use. The vision for the Bow River Corridor and for this strategy as a whole is deeply connected to the guiding principles. These principles reflect what we heard from the community, that the river is something to steward, to share, to explore, and to belong to. They represent our collective aspirations for how the corridor should function, feel, and evolve over time. But more importantly, they don't just live at the front of the document, they're woven throughout. Every recommendation, priority, and action in the strategy is built from these principles, supported by the engagement and feedback and the data. So to guide the future planning and investment, the corridor has been organized into 5 distinct character typologies: energy and activation, gather and play, rugged and wild, natural discovery, and gateways to Cochrane. These typologies were shaped by community input, site-specific conditions, and research on the context, challenges, and opportunities along the riverfront. Some appear multiple times along the corridor to reflect reoccurring landscapes or other uses, while others are more targeted based on their unique function and potential. These typologies aren't meant to replace existing uses, but to build on them. The strategy provides a detailed breakdown for each typology, including key risks, bold opportunities, and general recommendations. In this presentation, I'll provide a brief overview for each character area, but it's important to note that the strategy document itself contains much more depth. So the Gateways to Cochrane typology focuses on creating strong first impressions at the east and west entry points into Cochrane. These areas are more than just trail access points. They're an opportunity to boldly reflect Cochrane's identity and values. Through community feedback, we heard a clear desire for these spaces to be welcoming, well-equipped, and reflective of the natural beauty and vibrancy of the area. There's strong support for amenities like rest areas, interpretive signage, cafes or food truck opportunities, and gathering spaces that can serve both residents and visitors. These gateways should orient people to the corridor while offering a clear sense of arrival, featuring trail maps, bold signage, and storytelling elements that highlight Cochrane's connection to the river, its culture, and surrounding landscapes. Importantly, they also support active transportation and tourism by integrating bicycle infrastructure, restrooms, and year-round features that make the corridor accessible and engaging in every season. Investing in these nodes will not only elevate the user experience, but also reinforce Cochrane's role as a steward of the Bow River and a destination in its own right. The rugged and wild typology focuses on areas of the corridor defined by steep slopes, uneven terrain, and sensitive natural features. These are spaces where development or heavy programming isn't appropriate. Well, what's valued here is the landscape itself. This typology is about placekeeping, preserving the natural character of the land because of its ecological or cultural significance. Through engagement, we consistently heard the community's desire to maintain these wild spaces, protect wildlife habitats, and prevent the kind of overuse that damages vegetation and ecosystems. Recommendations here prioritize conservation, designating formal trails, adding interpretive signage, and restricting access during sensitive times like wildlife breeding seasons. There is also consideration for operations and maintenance with a low to moderate service level to respect the natural state of these areas. While many parts of the corridor will balance activation and recreation, rugged and wild is where we lean into environmental stewardship, ensuring these areas remain intact, respected, and safely accessible for those who want to connect with nature in a quieter, more natural way. The natural discovery typology is focused on protecting and enhancing the natural environment while creating quiet, low-impact spaces for people to enjoy and connect with nature. These areas are generally adjacent to residential neighborhoods and offer opportunities for passive recreation, like walking, bird watching, reading, or enjoying the views. We heard clearly through engagement that preserving key view sheds, particularly along the north edge of the river, is a priority, and that maintaining a sense of peace, solitude, and respect for neighboring homes is essential. Recommendations in this typology include formalizing river access at designated points, managing off-leash dog activity by offering alternative spaces elsewhere in town, and providing naturalized buffers in areas close to residential lots. There's also strong emphasis on interpretive signage, discovery nodes, and an opportunity to explore interpretive nature centers at the East Gateway. Ultimately, the natural discovery areas are about fostering a deeper connection with nature, inviting people to slow down, observe, and learn, while still prioritizing ecological health, habitat protection, and thoughtful design. The gather and play typology focuses on creating vibrant, active spaces where the community can come together to play, celebrate, and connect. These areas support recreation, arts, cultural programming, and social interaction, making some of the most dynamic nodes along the corridor places like Mitford Park, Riverfront Park, Rotary Park, and the SLS interface. The SLS interface is already recognized as a community hub, and this typology builds on that momentum. There was also clear interest in having spaces that support cultural expression, like local events, fitness, and water-based activities. Recommendations focus on improving access, enhancing trail connectivity, increasing safety and signage, and adding multifunctional amenities like shaded group areas, watercraft access, and beautification under bridges. These are the spaces where the community's energy comes to life, and with thoughtful design, clear programming, and inclusive infrastructure, they can continue to grow into a welcoming, safe, and engaging places for all ages and abilities. The energy and activation typology represents a vibrant, high-impact area of the heart of the corridor, a place where community connection, culture, recreation, and economic opportunity intersect. Positioned near the midpoint of the river, this area acts as a natural bridge between downtown and historic downtown Cochrane. It's envisioned as a lively hub that supports future residential and commercial development, while also offering space for events, small businesses, active recreation, and public gathering. Through engagement, we heard strong interest in creating signature experiences like food and beverage spaces, pop-up vendors, performance venues, and recreational rentals. There's also an opportunity to transform the River Avenue Bridge into a standout pedestrian and cultural feature. Recommendations for this area focus on flexible design, wayfinding, vibrant public art, and partnerships with local organizations to co-create and steward the space. With the right vision and infrastructure, this typology can evolve into a cornerstone destination, celebrating Cochrane's energy, supporting tourism and economic growth, and offering an inclusive, welcoming space for both residents and visitors to connect, create, and celebrate year-round. So the Bow River strategy is built around a bold long-term vision. But we also recognize the implementation will take time, resources, and collaboration. The strategy outlines a 20-year phasing plan to help guide future decision-making, knowing that not every element will happen all at once. Some projects may move forward quickly, especially where there are clear safety or environmental risks, available funding, or alignment with ongoing capital work. Others will take longer, particularly where regulatory complexity or multi-party partnerships are involved. To support prioritization, a set of evaluation criteria has been developed that considers risks, opportunities, complexity, funding, and alignment with broader town goals. These filters help ensure we're advancing the right projects at the right time, whether it's short-term, which is 0 to 3 years, mid-term, which is 4 to 10 years, or long-term, which is 11 to 20 years. While the timeline may shift over time, this phased approach provides a flexible strategic roadmap. It allows for us to be proactive, responsive to emerging opportunities, and intentional in how we move the vision to an action. To track progress and ensure accountability over the 20-year implementation of the Bow River strategy, we've identified a series of key indicators that reflect both tangible actions and broader community outcomes. These indicators help us measure success, adapt our approach over time, and remain aligned with the strategy's vision and guiding principles. Some of the early signs of success include capital alignment, embedding priority projects into the town's capital plan, and taking early action by initiating design work where funding is available. Partnership development is another critical piece, as many of the strategy's goals rely on collaboration with local organizations and community groups. Equally important is public awareness, ensuring that the strategy is shared and widely to build support and momentum. As implementation unfolds, we'll continue with ongoing monitoring, conducting an annual review to assess progress and adjust as needed. Success also means policy integration. With the strategy's priorities reflected in the future planning documents and development alignment, ensuring new projects support the corridor's long-term goals. We'll be looking for co-created programs that highlight environmental stewardship and cultural integration, and tracking community experience through feedback, satisfaction, and usage patterns. These indicators work together to help us move forward intentionally, transparently, and in a way that reflects both community values and evolving needs along the riverfront. So to ensure that the Bow River strategy remains active, relevant, and accountable over the long term, a clear approach to monitoring and reporting progress has been built into the plan. This includes an annual alignment and review led by town administration to assess progress and ensure continued alignment with strategic priorities. A formal progress evaluation will be completed each year, ideally ahead of the capital planning and budgeting cycle, so that upcoming decisions are grounded in current implementation status. Just as important as tracking progress is celebrating success and communicating progress. By sharing updates broadly with the community, partners, and stakeholders, we will build momentum and community pride on what's being accomplished. The strategy also outlines defined roles and strategic partnerships, recognizing that strong implementation will require close collaboration with groups like Cochrane Tourism, SEAC, Bite Cochrane, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, the many others who have shared interest along this corridor. To support the delivery of future phases, there will be ongoing focus and funding stream assessment, looking across all levels of government and community-based initiatives to identify partnership and grant opportunities that reduce pressure on local tax funding. Thank you, and this evening administration is looking for feedback from council on the draft strategy, and so once we have all of that, we're going to refine the strategy and bring it back on May 12th for final consideration and approval.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. I'm sure that'll generate some questions and comments. It looks like Mayor Janung is up first.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the report, and it's in depth. So I made notes both on my phone and paper copies tonight. So if I'm shuffling around over here, that's the reason. But I just wanted to start by thanking you, Michelle, and your team, and everyone at Urban for the excellent work. I think most of what I'm seeing in the document is spot on. I just have a few points on that. One of the challenges that I see through the plan is oversight. Can you maybe speak more about how this will be addressed? I'd just like to understand the governance structure of that will support implementation, whether that's like a coordinator or a department that's working on this, or do you have another model in mind?
So through the chair to the mayor, currently the plan is in the 2025 budget, there was a parks planner that was approved, and so that lands under my section of Parks and Active Living. So the parks planner would be responsible for ensuring that this plan is kept alive and following the process and providing guidance through the implementation.
Yeah, okay, so a dedicated resource to steward the plan.
To steward all of the Parks and Active Living planning. Yeah,
perfect. Okay, love that answer. Next point is on the phased approach. I really like that. There's a lot in there, obviously 20 years that you've covered. So how do we eat an elephant, right? It's one bite at a time, but I'm just interested to see what high impact, kind of low cost initiatives that we could roll out early on to kind of generate interest and momentum in the plan and then get more community members on board, which was one of your goals at the end there.
I have one thing and then I'll let you add.
Like, are there two or three things that residents might really see early on that might activate them?
So through the chair to Mr. Mayor, actually one of the projects that's outlined in the strategy is happening this year, and so that's the trout sanctuary along the confluence. So we will be able to share that with the community, and we are utilizing what's been outlined in guidance for in the strategy. So we will continue to build on that, and we would be reporting back that was outlined as an important critical piece for building out the strategy. I'm not sure, Lee, if you've got anything else.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having me, through the chair to the mayor as well. A couple other things that we're also seeing ongoing are a wayfinding strategy. So that would initially be able to provide some a whole spectrum of broader recommendations and details surrounding the gateways, especially to kind of bookend the boundaries of the town and really establish what that could look like, as well as along the corridor as well. The other piece that I wanted to bring up was there's a lot of low-hanging accessibility improvements too that could be made that I think would really increase the quality of life for residents as they access the corridor itself, but as they enjoy the pathway system. So those are two that come to mind.
Yeah, I had kind of wayfinding in mind as well. Is that like physical structures, or would that be more, or could it be both, like a interactive sort of app or tech-based?
Yeah, I would say yes and yes,
Yeah.
all of the above.
And to build on that, actually in the 2025 capital plan, there was a budget allocated to start building out wayfinding within the community as well.
If I may, through the chair, if I just may add to this, is that my question may be zoomed out a little bit, or my remarks may be zoomed out a little bit from your specific question, Mr. Mayor, but it did trigger a thought. The low cost, and then the second part of that is the high impact piece, and I think that that's one of the things that we are trying to highlight where government agencies are often criticized for creating reports that sit on shelves and don't drive any meaningful impact, and so we're really interested in creating a strategy that actually drives meaningful change in behaviors and activities. And so some of the impact will not necessarily be physical changes to the space. It will be behavioral changes, as in doing things that we don't currently do by providing some guidance around those spaces, but it may also mean some of the things that we are currently doing are no longer appropriate in some of those spaces. And I think that's where some of the high impact is going to come, in terms of people who become familiar with a certain pattern or a certain set of engagement with these spaces and with the Bow River may find that some of those behaviors and some of those patterns need to adjust and change as we go forward. I think we've heard in this chamber a couple of times the overloved verbiage around some of these spaces, so I just want to identify that if this strategy is implemented, it will impact people's behavior, and not all people will likely look on that favorably, as in it may be, hey, I used to really like to take my dog here and do this certain thing at this place, and that may no longer be an appropriate activity based on, again, the pressures we're feeling from scope and scale of use in those areas.
Perfect segue into my next point. That this is more than just infrastructure, right? It's the river, I would argue, is part of Cochrane's identity. You spoke to that right at the beginning, and I'm excited about all those opportunities that come with that. But I think that we really need to do a good job of telling the river story. And is that part of the wayfinding? So yes and yes again?
Through the chair to the mayor, absolutely, yes. So there's an educational component to this, and it comes under the lens of conservation. So as you'll see, two of the typologies directly talk about the conservation efforts in a pretty bold way. I think bold and balanced are two words that we grappled with throughout the entire process. And when it comes to like some potential mismanagement of different areas along the river, there are some key spaces where we're seeing that overuse happen, to Mr. Derricott's point. I think what we can do now, especially with growth in mind, is starting to change those behaviors and model that along the corridor. But some of these quick win exercises, like the accessibility, like the wayfinding, will definitely have that opportunity for educational and informational signage that also bolster the etiquette along the pathway as well, and help navigate user conflicts.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I'll skip that in my list here, but you mentioned multiple times how the river is under pressure at certain points, and I just want to outline that for me, this plan needs to be about riparian restoration and protecting sensitive habitat, and that needs to be treated like as a foundational piece in the plan versus just an optional one. And I think you've kind of already touched on some of this, but the ecological health of the river, how will that be monitored through this plan?
So through the chair to the mayor, one thing that we have outlined is essentially partnering with other organizations that have that capacity to monitor. So through our stakeholder engagement, we had several environmental related groups that had strong interest in seeing this through, supporting in any way they could. And I think there's different leverage mechanisms that could be utilized there. I don't know, Michelle, do you want to add anything?
I think to build on that too, we can also utilize the environmental task force through that process as well.
All right, you're getting to my last points here. Sorry, Council, for dominating the floor here. I just have a couple more points. We've received some correspondence over the last few days and throughout through the engagement process. And one of the central, I guess, criticisms is that the Bow River strategy lacks clear alignment with foundational watershed planning frameworks like the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, the Bow River and Jumping Pound watershed plans. I think it's a reasonable ask to have the strategy directly align or cross-reference those plans. Could you maybe speak to why it doesn't, or was that just something our feedback is going to generate more of?
Yeah, through the chair to the mayor. So I think there were so many different layers to this plan that we were exploring. I don't think it was necessarily overlooked, but it might not have been explicitly mentioned as part of the plan. So as we have been receiving the feedback from multiple different groups, organizations, and individuals, I think that's something worth maybe adding in an appendix or indices to kind of lay out what exactly was involved, because it was very thorough.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I agree with that. And then another piece of feedback was developing a Bow River and tributaries overlay in our land use bylaw, similar to what Edmonton and Red Deer have done. And I agree with that. I'd just like to see administration explore that option further with, like in the next iteration. I'm seeing you nod. second last one, we also heard that the 200-meter corridor, is that ecologically appropriate? Or is that just a starting point, and could it, yeah, I see a nod.
Through the chair to the mayor. So it was an arbitrary offset, essentially, just for the purposes of narrowing and defining a study area. Through the river access impact study, which was attached as an appendix and informed this strategy, a 50-meter development offset was recommended through that, but we wanted to have a broader scope and extent so that we could see what that interface looked like, especially when it came to private residences and some of the distinct junctions from like a road network, pathway network perspective as well.
Okay, and I think I know the answer to this next one, but water scarcity, obviously something this whole corridor is under pressure from, but the over-allocation through Alberta Environment on the water license, et cetera, and then droughts. What is there a broader zoom out lens that you're looking at? Like we're looking at this in isolation of our little stretch of the river. Really, what happens upstream impacts us, and what happens downstream will impact millions. Was there a take on that in the plan, or is that too broad of a scope?
Yeah, through the chair to the mayor. So again, trying to narrow and define the scope for the sake of just being purposeful with the document. We do touch on it to a degree in the river access impact study. We asked them to take a look from more of a regional perspective, just watershed management. We don't necessarily go into the deep context of it. However, I think it's also reflected in some of our guiding principles as well. So in terms of like our 7 generation thinking and stewarding the land, so using that terminology to kind of frame up what it is, like this is our defined boundary of where we're stewarding the water and the river and the corridor, but we're part of much greater kind of impacts to the region around us, and even what we're receiving from the west side as well. So we do speak to it in those terms.
Yeah, okay. I just think we can't be looking at it in isolation is the point, I guess. So I hope you're not taking the comments as a rejection of the plan. I think I'd like to see it stronger. I have a couple of points. So a technical review of alignment with watershed plans, which you pointed out. Options for a Bow River overlay in the land use bylaw, and again, I'm not suggesting we tear apart our land use bylaw, but connect them. Evaluation of the riparian width based on the science, which I'm understanding you're already doing. And Michelle, to your point, I had this send to our environmental task force for feedback on all of the things that I kind of listed. But again, thank you for everything that you've done so far. I think it's an excellent document. I think it just needs to be a little more teeth in it. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On to Councillor Fedeko.
Thank you for the report. I'm going to start off by asking, so if this isn't adopted by May 12th, what are the ramifications of us not adopting it by then?
Through the chair to Councillor Fedeko, there are no ramifications. It was when we could put it on the agenda, but we can definitely push it back if all of the feedback changes the direction of the document at all.
Yeah, I think I think the mayor made some really valid points that I think this isn't going to be something that I'm going to be comfortable in voting with in 3 weeks. I do want some clarification on some things. What kind of a community input was gathered? Other than I kind of read that there was, farmer's market, there was a pop-up at the outhouse races. What kind of community input did we actually get to establish where the community landed with this plan?
So through the chair to Councillor Fedeko, we also built it into the first phase of the Parks, Culture and Active Living Master Plan. So through that first phase of engagement, we reached over 2,000 people between the engagement pop-ups, but also the survey, and then we also had the virtual map. So Urban Systems and RC Strategies collaborated on the questions that we were asking, and then we also ensured that all of the map pins that we were asking about where people felt safe or they felt like needed improvement, all of that data was shared as well.
Okay, kind of to the mayor's point, I would like to see the metrics of how this compares to the Bow River Watershed Management Plan, the Jumping Pound Creek Management Plan, the Big Hill Creek Management Plan, and the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan. I think that we need to see some real metrics of how this has been compared to it, as well as I agree with the Environmental Committee being included in some of the feedback. I was a little surprised that the River Wave Park was kind of brought back into this discussion. I don't know, for some reason, maybe I thought it died a slow death in the last election. But no, it seems to have come back up. I mean, I haven't heard anything about this project kind of since that point. I feel like council hasn't heard a lot of some of this stuff prior to just the plan being kind of pushed on us. And then there was a comment about the off-leash dog space, which we haven't created. I don't even know where you would put people because we don't have any additional off-leash dog spaces in town. So I have many concerns about this plan before I'm ever going to give it my support. I would like to see metrics. I'd like to see some evaluation with some of the groups that I just suggested, as well as the environmental action. And then, you know what, if this doesn't get approved for another 6 months, if we're not losing anything, if we're not losing any sleep, it's not costing anything, then I'd like to push it off until we have the actual data that we need to have to feel comfortable for.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fedeko. Councillor McFadden?
Yeah, I was going to start off on the other foot. I was actually impressed with the public engagement and the diversity, and I've actually had some feedback from folks reaching out to say, hey, you know, as part of that, I think it was a good job. So I wanted to start with some kudos on that. I just also wanted to echo, I think the mayor captured a couple of my thoughts. I'd like to see more of a focus on that riparian preservation and restoration piece. And also I think in alignment with the regional plans and the watershed plans, those type of things. It'd be great to see that alignment there and to make sure that we are in alignment with those. And so as you were going through your presentation, some of my questions got answered, some did not. So, I mean, the river really is becoming more and more a part of our identity, and more people are embracing it and engaging with it. And in part it is becoming overloved, as we've all identified. And one of my fears is that's just going to increase with another one of the projects that I am a big champion of. So in your presentation or in your thoughts, any idea about how the Trans-Canada Trail could impact this? Because I feel that if the Trans-Canada Trail, we're getting closer to that being a reality in our community every day. Folks are going to be accessing the trail. They're going to want to be by the river, which is going to cause even more impact on a highly valuable and very a space that's feeling a lot of pressure already. So there's how do you kind of like protect and preserve the riparian nature that the Trans-Canada Trail impact might have. But then also how do we balance off the use of having visitors using the trail system, but also preserving these spaces for our own residents. So if you could speak to the Trans-Canada Trail question, please.
Through the chair to Councillor McFadden, great questions and observations. The Trans-Canada Trail was a huge driver in even having this project take off. And so fundamental to the considerations. I think what we tried to do was listen to residents' feedback and then shape what that could look like in terms of balancing out like heavily used spaces. So actually influencing where that usership could occur in more like high impact, high intensity ways, so that it depressurized different areas for it to be used in its kind of current state as reflective areas, as areas where it's left untouched entirely for riparian, its natural riparian use. So that's kind of the balance is what we were seeing. We did identify how pathways could incorporate that use or be like improved or increased in certain areas in order to receive visitors, especially on the east side, as that gets developed out, because we can anticipate that there may be heavier use coming from the east side than the west, especially initially. So having a place for them to land and a place for them to go, so that it's not necessarily just a bombardment of overuse and intensification throughout the entire corridor, but actually channel that into areas specifically that could be economic opportunities as well.
Okay. That's good to hear. Back onto the riparian protection piece, and more of the environmental protection piece, which I see it more kind of maybe in the language of the presentation than maybe I heard, because this is a very comprehensive report. Because what I was hoping to hear a little bit more of was, you know, the fisheries preservation. Like, we want to provide access to people to fish, but we also need to preserve those fisheries. We also need to preserve, you know, the bird habitats, and, you know, for the folks that get up early to walk, I mean, it's a great thing to see the blue heron fishing in the little creeks, right? But we don't want to lose that either. So, yeah, I think maybe just a clear link about how we're going to, you know, preserve, restore, maybe even enhance those habitats would be great, in balance with helping folks to access it. And then on the swing side of that, like, how can we kind of help with access? So there was the, you know, boat access for our avid kayakers and paddleboarders that like to have access to be able to put in on the upstream part and get down to the bridge or wherever we can kind of make that happen. So to build that into the plan, I think would be great to be able to see. River access.
Yeah, maybe on that, through the chair to Councillor McFadden. So we have built in a couple layers of access. So emergency access is one, acknowledging that there's only one current access point that's actually designated for that use. Yep. So there's two others that are tabled through the recommendations. The other is kind of that non-motorized use, so slips in and out of the water that are safe. So building, you know, infrastructure kind of in the water or at the water's edge so that you create some slower traveling water, as well as reinforcing that with signage, different amenities that can support those users, and also reinforce the etiquette that is expected of them. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my throat today. But whether they're coming through Cochrane, like from outside of Cochrane, or whether they're actually launching within Cochrane and just using this immediate area.
Yeah, the access both for emergency and for the recreation would be great. And I did see in the one piece here regarding the fisheries, I think, it was speaking to the Jumping Pound Confluence, I think it was called. And it had identified that there are seasonal restricted activities. There's some windows there. Is there current restrictions, or is that planned restrictions?
Do you want to take that? Or do you? Yeah, so through the chair to Councillor McFadden, so those are suggestions, those bold suggestions of how we can improve our conservation efforts in those spaces. We don't currently have closed off seasons, but it is something that we can be exploring and enhance those areas for the wildlife. So along the south side of the river, it is a wildlife corridor. So we know that there's opportunity there to enhance that. I just want to build on that.
Yeah, there are some other suggestions, recommendations that come through the provincial entities as well that we could leverage for that too. It is touched on in the river access impact study, but again, we can kind of borrow that into the content of the Bow River strategy if that's helpful.
Yeah, and maybe I just read it wrong. I was reading it as it was a current state, and I was like, I did not know that. So that's good. I think you've talked a little bit to the off-leash piece. Oh, I did have a question. I was looking at your maps. I'm seeing in a lot of the maps, the Jim Elfman Park is kind of being identified as a smaller landmass than I currently understand it, because my current understanding of the Jim Elfman is from kind of the bridge parking lot through that, and then kind of to the bridge of the rec center. So the map I'm seeing in here is not reflective of my current understanding, and I believe that could raise a lot of questions with folks.
Through the chair to Councillor McFadden. So definitely it is, your understanding is correct. It's essentially River Avenue, that parking lot, all the way to SLS. What we're reflecting on in the typology diagrams, which maybe we could just take back for consideration. Yeah, Thanks, Michelle. Yeah,
It's a big maroon blob.
yeah, so the green strip that you see underneath, that entire portion is Jim Effelman. But what we're speaking to is just the character zones, like from a future lens.
Okay. Yeah, good to get that clarity. And final kudos before I turn it over to my colleagues. I really did appreciate that you identified different unique characters and uses for each of the areas, how they're currently used and how they can be used. So I really appreciated that approach. I wanted to give you kudos for that. So, yeah, lots for me to kind of like review and to think on. But this is a lot of work's gone into this, and I think it's a good starting point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. On to Councillor Nagel.
Yeah, first, let me say I agree with my colleague's assessment. This is a very, very good report and great presentation. So I can tell a lot of work and thought went into it, and I really appreciated the way it seems like the team had various lenses applied to the river. It was just very thoughtful, just top quality. Thank you. But I do want to dial in on a few specific points. On the Jim Muffleman Dog Park, if this is accepted by council, what would be the impact or change to that dog park as well as any other dog park? I guess there's the smaller one. I don't even know the name of the other one, but the one that's by Boston Pizza and the skate park.
Maybe, if you go back, that one, I didn't know there's the dog park in there too.
Great. Through the chair to Councillor Nagel. Yeah, so the impact immediately, what we were talking about initially was physical separation from the edge of the park to the river. So there's a couple things that we heard during engagement and also like through our own eyes in observing the area. There's a significant slope, so there's some safety concerns there immediately and imminently. So that would be kind of one first step. But moreover, kind of the broader conversation around just reprogramming and the change management of how that area is used entirely is something that's on the table as well. So dog parks do exist around Cochrane, I think significantly near Mitford Park, so kind of Riverfront Park lowlands, that transition by Highway 22, there's one, as well as along Highway 22 further up there by the Super 8. I think one thing to consider, and what we heard from dog owners and users that come with dogs, is that they're looking for a place for their dogs to swim. So access to water is really what they were getting at. That was the experience that they were after, and they weren't necessarily seeing other opportunities for that outside of the corridor. So one of the the recommendations in here is to actually start to intentionally design key places where that type of interaction or experience can be mimicked to start to depressurize the direct use to the water itself. Other kind of intermittent or intermediate lenses could be just defining where dogs go. So right now we were noticing kind of they're all over the place. That's what we were hearing from residents as well and people that we engaged with. Not necessarily seeing enforcement of how people are interacting or using this off-leash space. Seeing kind of an increased sense of user conflict or even between dog owners and users. So just a little bit more definition initially and off the bat about where dogs can go, how they can use it, and that etiquette factor. But with that broader context in mind of what are the other opportunities throughout town. Does that answer?
I'm going to build on that just a little bit. So last year there was a Jim Musselman study that was completed as well. And so through that study, this study was also brought into this strategy. But what we saw was that there is a lot of environmental damage happening along that area, and it's specific to the dogs accessing the river. So this year there is work being done on the riparian zone throughout that park, which will close part of the park. There will be further communications coming out when we have that timeline built in. But the strategy is also driving the Jim Effelman study is driving the recommendations for the strategy and the environmental considerations that were found through that study.
There's a lot to unpack.
There is,
There's, I heard a lot of generalities that may or may
If I
not have
may,
very specific
Yeah,
implications.
I think to just boil it down to as simple as possible, right now, anywhere along there, your dog can go down the bank and go into the river. And in the future, the suggestion would be that that's not a sustainable practice, that there would still be places for dogs to access the river, but it just wouldn't be across the entirety of that river space, and there would be more specific designed areas where river access would be possible, but not just along the entirety of that park interface.
So kind of, I'm imagining probably where the hill starts right after the parking lot, a fence of some type all the way until where it starts going down to like a shore or a beach. I guess not a shore, a beach. That area would be fenced off. What would that fence look like? Chain link fence or like
Through the chair to Councillor Nagel, we actually have a sub-bullet in there for the recommendation that it needs to fit like the Western Heritage theme,
Okay.
Using natural materials.
Okay. I know I'm asking very detailed questions about a very large visionary document, but this is one of the issues the community is going to want details about, I believe. And as a counselor, I feel it is my obligation to get those details before I approve this plan, because I know it's going to be hot button, to say the least. Yeah, okay, so I just processing all that because I did have other questions. I'm gonna have to go to my next questions and then maybe come back to this dog park stuff before the conversation's over. Another two things I wanted to try and achieve through this plan, is there some sort, I will, full disclosure, I did not read this full 296 page plan. So I just tried doing a control F search for setbacks. Is there a policy, is there any policy coming forward as part of this that would create a setback zone between the river and where there can be future development in the town of Cochrane boundaries?
Through the chair to Councillor Nagel, there is a recommendation, so no recommended policy at this point, but it could be reflected through that lens of a bylaw review for a 50-meter setback from the river for development.
50 meters. So, because what I would hope to achieve is to say that, like, henceforth, all development in town of Cochrane boundaries would have a gigantic green belt. 50 meters seems. What, do you know the distance of the park over by in Midford, or sorry, Bow Meadows, for example? What is how big is 50 meters? That's half a football field.
Yeah, I don't have a scale on me.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Roughly 50
Yeah.
meters.
And if I may just add too, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think the 50 meters is a recommendation. That's discretionary to yourselves as policymakers and as part of that, and that's part of the consideration. And so perhaps one of the things that could be a takeaway is to come back with a little bit more about what that would look like and which areas we could demonstrate and show where 50 meters is compared to what we're currently seeing. So we have a something to contextualize that for council.
Yeah, I if we could, I'd like to increase it. Like obviously there's reasonable limitations, but I think the bigger the better. The Bow River, I've heard the word identity come up in the conversation tonight. The Bow River, I think, is the town's greatest asset by far. And I want to make sure it's protected, not just in the near future, but in perpetuity for hundreds of years. And I just see the river forever being this amazing place where people from all around can come to congregate. And when you build houses up against it, like Riverview, for example, there's places where it's maybe only 10 meters to the edge of the river, and that's just not enough space. And I hope in the future we can expand that. So if we can go higher than 50 meters in that setback, I'd love to do that. And then my next question was wildlife corridors, something that came up. I brought it up in the Environmental Action Committee, but something that came up at the committee is I believe we need to be thinking about wildlife corridors, and that includes wildlife access to the Bow River. Whenever I drive through Cochrane in the evening or morning, I can't be the only person who sees this, but there are so many deer and other wildlife that are making the daily route down to the river to get presumably some water to drink. And I really think we need to have a clear strategy of access for wildlife to and from the river in multiple locations. So that's another piece that I'd like to see. So I'm concerned primarily with the dog park, long-term setback plans that would expand out into Cochrane's boundaries, should the town of Cochrane boundaries ever get larger, and then wildlife corridors. And I turn it over to my colleagues as I want to think more about this dog park thing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nagel. Councillor Flowers, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. Overall, I did appreciate how much you talk about us enjoying the river, but protecting it at the same time, which is so important. One of my questions, I think you did have lots of community input, but did you talk to the Indigenous community, and how did you get feedback from them?
So through the chair to Councillor Flowers, they would have been built into the engagement, but at the end of the strategy, there is a recommendation that as we develop further on site specifics, we are doing Indigenous consultation and further relationship building with them based on each site.
Okay, good to hear. It is an in-depth report, and I too didn't read every page. It was a lot. And I find it hard to give feedback because I'm not an expert in any of that. So I would love to hear from the Environmental Action Committee and see what they have to say. And we did get input from the community, so I really hate to see us rush this because it's huge.
So if I can provide some clarity, the Environmental Task Force has seen the document and they've had an opportunity to provide feedback. Same with the Parks and Recreation Committee. So the drafted document went to them 2 weeks ago and they provided feedback. Their feedback is built into this version that you are seeing this evening.
Oh, that's good to hear. So we don't have a public hearing on this or anything. It's just give feedback, make changes, and adopt it.
Yes.
Okay, can't read my own notes very good, but I think that was all the questions I had for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McFadden.
Yeah, thank you. I just, with the plan, so if council adopts this plan, that doesn't then say that these changes are going to happen. Like, so one of my concerns, I'm sure I'll be asked this is, if you've adopted this plan, have we committed to changing the parameters of the Jim Uffelman Park?
So through the chair to Councillor McFadden, the recommendations would be what the guiding principles and that we would bring forward for capital budgets. So the changes and recommendations that are outlined in the strategy is what we would follow if this is approved.
Okay, so that would change the boundaries?
If I may, I think there's two things there is that to build on what Ms. Lorem was sharing is the guiding principles would drive for future policy and budgetary decisions, but there would still be future policy and budgetary conditions. I think with the specific nature of Jim Uffelman Park, I've said this before in discussions around this, we can't keep doing what we're doing now. We have to see change there. And so I think if we want to have the best outcomes for that beloved part of our community, we must interface with it differently. But this strategy does not identify the very specific elements of what that would look like. There's still future decision points around, for example, if there's going to be a separation by fence or change of use, or those types of things would still come through subsequent decisions that would need to be made.
Okay, that was the clarity I was looking for. Thank you. River access. Oh, in this, so as much as we've talked about, there's different, does this plan also kind of come up with like a maintenance commitments to these areas as well?
Through the chair to Councillor McFadden, so thank you for bringing that up. In each of these 5 character typologies, there's generalized recommendations, but one of the action items or recommendations in the implementation plan is to actually develop an operations and maintenance plan or strategy in and of itself. In speaking with the Parks group as well as other users, it's very front of mind, I think, and just in determining how and to what level of service we're managing our park systems. And especially because each of these 5 different zones or typologies, they demand different levels of service. It became very apparent that that was something that needed to be a next step coming out of this document. in collaboration with RC Strategies, who's working on the Parks, Rec, and Culture Master Plan. That's been a point of collaboration and speaking between the two projects, is just how are we going to actually approach different uses and different levels of intensity depending on what the anticipated use or programmed use is.
Okay. Yeah, and so I spend a fair amount of time at off-leash parks nowadays. And so, yeah, it's going to be great to, between the two plans, to kind of get to some identified, service levels and maintenance levels and how we can help those parks be managed a little bit better and get a chance to recover. I think the only thing that survives out there right now is dandelions. So, anyway, thank you for a great presentation. I've got lots to kind of muse on prior to our next presentation. So thank you. That's all the questions I think I have tonight.
Okay, great. Councillor Fedeko.
Yeah, just a couple more comments. I think both Councillor McFadden and Councillor Nago kind of mentioned this, but with the recommendations being more of a guiding light, I think I would like to see some policy actually built into it when going into regarding setbacks and things like that. I think that has to be our first order of approval, is determining what that should be, rather than us approving a plan and then coming back to it to be able to kind of interject. I become a little bit worried that, then we approve a plan and it becomes recommended action, and then it starts to snowball into maybe things that council hasn't necessarily highlighted, but then all of a sudden decisions are being made because it's got the overarching kind of guidelines and recommendations that go along with it, but then council seems to be left out, and that becomes part of like what's been approved by council. I'd rather see that stuff built in so that there's a very concrete plan, so that we have understanding, we go to the community, and then we can talk about all those things that go along with it prior to us actually adopting the plan overall. Because I mean, even when it was asked, it's like there's no recommended policy, just recommendations. I like to see the actual policy become part and built into the actual plan prior to the approving.
Through the chair to Councillor Fedeko. I guess like this, just to clarify as well, this isn't necessarily a plan, it is just a strategy. So the ask of like through the project was to create some kind of guiding principles, the vision that everyone could buy into from a community lens and stakeholder lens. And then from there would be these additional steps that council would have an opportunity to actually like reflect and dive into the deep end on those actual recommendations when it came into a policy that was more governing, if that provides some clarity.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it just becomes a bit fuzzy on what those are, right? And so, I mean, unless they're actually laid out as to where council gets to interject and say things, it becomes a kind of a lofty plan, and we all know a lofty strategy. I don't even know what you want to call it, but I do become worried that this starts to snowball into other things, and I don't know where council has the option or the know-how to be able to interject into some of these decision-making points. I'd like to see it very much more clarified, so that then we can take that forward and speak to it to the community as well, so that we can give them some assurance that this is not just going forward, because that's what the community expects. They hear this, they think it's just going to go forward. We can't even talk as council as to what the checks and balances are, because we don't know. And I think that I would like to know those steps prior to adopting. And I get it, it's high level. However, I think that it goes into that next level that we perhaps need to have some more understanding of where council gets a feed in and what does that look like.
If I may just, through the chair, Councilor Fedeko, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, that identifying specific policy action that council might take as a result of this plan, is that what you're looking for? And I think that there is some of that, but perhaps we can just add that into a list in the appendix that just kind of really lays it out as here's some policy recommendations. That obviously the work of building those specific policies would still have to happen post-adoption, but just giving more visibility as to what those actionable items might be. Does that line up with what you're hoping to see?
Yeah, 100%, because I think then the community then can also look at it and say, okay, I see that this is not just a document that we adopt. It's something that there's still checks and balances that are being done along the way, but it doesn't really state that anywhere, right? And so I just want to make sure that people can actually read that and understand that we still have the ability to change, correct, amend, whatever that looks like, or maybe we just go forward, but there should be something that perhaps gives some timelines or just some recommended actions of what that's going to look like coming back to council. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like that exhausts the lights. I have a few thoughts of my own that are unique to the discussion that haven't been brought up yet, so I'll just stick to those. Tagging on to what Councillor Fedeko was just talking about and Councillor Nagel brought up earlier about actually specifics of staging. I know there's 3 different terms used in the document about immediate, medium term and long term aspects of the project. Just to be more specific about something like we brought up fencing in Councillor Nagel's comments there about I forget how it was phrased, but it was fencing. It wouldn't be metal fencing. It would be did I hear wooden or something that matches the environment of the area? Would something like that be just brought ahead without another council touch point, or how would something specifically like that go ahead? I assume that would be a capital piece, so it would be brought forward during budget time before fencing would go in. Is that correct on that topic?
Yes, Councillor Wilson, you're correct. It would come through the capital budget process where we're outlining what the project is
Okay.
With a design plan and exactly how that would be laid out.
Okay, excellent. So that's a touch point with council, which was one of my questions about any of the capital items then. How about something more like, I put overloved area in the study, which was something CEO or CAO Derricott talked about, where there's a few areas that are just right now have way too much traffic and they're being essentially trampled. When new policy, when new decisions about how the use of that is going to be changed, is there a touch point with council there? Because I'm not sure if there'd be a capital requirement for a change in like Jim Uffelman Park. How would that go ahead?
So to Councillor Wilson, all new policies would be brought forward to council, and council would be the decision makers of if that policy is approved or not before any project can go forward.
I think if I would just add, Councillor Wilson, that I would describe that as a service level change. And so anything that would initiate a service level change would trigger an interaction with council to review and verify and approve a service level change, something like restricting or adjusting or modifying the use of a public green space, to me would trigger a service level discussion at council.
Excellent. Okay, so that quells some of my fears where service level changes or capital requirements would obviously have to come back from council. So there's mandatory touch points right there. Another area of concern for me was Area 9, I believe, was on the map. Not concern, wrong word, but Area 9 was the area that's not even, doesn't even have zoning in our community right now on the far west edge. So just curious how that would come to pass with a plan like this as new development inevitably comes up there. Would that mean that a potential future developer that part of their green space, their 10% that they give as part of their future development, we would just be guiding how that south tip of their development would proceed? Is that how that would take place?
To Councillor Wilson, yeah, that's a great observation and question. I think because we're looking at the corridor holistically, we needed to apply something in those areas. And because we have almost, there's a greater potential for influence in those spaces, we can actually set the tone there with kind of how it's shaping out. So potentially, yes, that could definitely come through the policy lens for a recommended or suggested policy, through the updates that we're talking about here. But I think we needed to take a look comprehensively of like future existing conditions and see what the entire corridor could look like at full build out or even intermediate interims.
Okay, that makes sense to me too, thank you. My final questions were all around the money topic, one of my favorites. Just a question about how much money has been allocated to date. One thing that came to my mind was bank erosion allocations. I believe that was in our capital scheme. If you correct me if I'm wrong, would that be one of the initial things that's already been funded in our capital? And do we have other parts of this project that are already funded, or can you talk to any of the immediate things?
Yeah, so to Councillor Wilson, I mentioned earlier the Jim Uffelman work that is happening this year. So that was built into the parks operations project planning. And also the trout sanctuary was built in this year. And so as we continue to build out and think about 2026 and 2027, so Jim Effelman will be a multi-year approach so that we're not impacting the users significantly as we're trying to repair the riparian zone. But yeah, this year already, we do have some of the projects that we're planning for they're already actually in the strategy.
When you say riparian zone, Michelle, is that erosion-related aspects, like I assume, around the actual riverbank? Is that what's been funded?
Yes, that's correct, specific to the Jim Effelman area.
Okay. Okay, excellent. And my final one was, what are the consequences of a yes vote on May 12th? Should that be when this goes ahead? I understand that this is a high-level plan. That's a big question. But I'm just wondering, I guess, up to now, what costs have been associated outside of staff time to produce this? And then what can council expect to see in the future? And the future question, I suppose, is going to be a lot of capital requirements and at least staff time with the what we called service level changes. Is there anything else that I'm not considering there? So I've asked two questions. How much have we done for this current study? That would just be for our consultant, I suppose, if you could answer that. And then future consequences of a yes vote financially.
Yeah, so the strategy and the river access impact study was approved in 2024 and moved into the operational budget. And that total was $150,000 to complete the strategy. And then the service level change and the future asks. So all projects will be coming through future asks and future budget requests. So we don't have pricing for that, but in the strategy itself, there are, I believe you had the dollar values based on each project, where it was kind of like outlined in each typology, where the recommendations of should we do it short term, medium term, or long term, and then an estimated dollar value. We didn't want to put an exact number just due to the fact that pricing is changing all the time, and so it just kind of gives us that estimate. Service level changes in staffing, I unfortunately don't have an answer for that of what that would look like from a staffing perspective. But the adjustment and evaluation of what does a service level look like is something that would be internal for the team.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may just add to that, a yes vote on this does not immediately trigger additional cost considerations. What it will do is generate reports, work, recommendations that would potentially impact costs. But again, those decision points will happen at future budgets or through future policy decisions. So adopting the strategy does not immediately trigger those costs. There is other processes that would come along. I can think of, for example, we talked a little bit about how etiquette and use, in particular, if we contemplate significant changes in high use areas, we may recommend administratively that means we add additional enforcement resources to support those changes, but that would be decided or approved through a future budget, not by adopting the strategy.
Thank you for that clarity. The only thing left on my mind then is costs up till now. Did I just hear $150,000 for consultants up to this point? Is that the answer I got?
Yes, that includes the river access impact study and the development of the strategy and the engagement and the data evaluation.
And also the urban system study in front of us in this report?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for going through all that with me. It looks like a good plan to me. I see we did have lights on a second ago. I guess we don't. Okay. It looks like a very comprehensive global plan right now, and obviously I'm glad to hear that service level changes and capital requirements will come back to council as the project moves forward and all the different areas. And I can think of, especially when we use the term overloved, there's going to be some contentious areas about when we touch them, when we make any changes, that I'm glad to hear the council will be here to decide how things move forward and to answer all the inevitable questions that will come. But I support what we have in front of us right now anyway, and it seems administration has the answers they're looking for to come back in May.
Yeah, if I may, just to be clear on next steps, I think Michelle and perhaps our consultant from Urban can comment on this. Based on the feedback, I think there's more work to be done than will allow us to come back on May 12th. So I thought I would just identify that I think it's unlikely that you'll see this in the next month. I don't know that we would probably be fair to try and identify a specific time right now, but we appreciate and need this kind of feedback. This will allow us to go back and refine the plan and consider some of the pieces I would suggest also that the conversation continues at the environmental task force level to cover some of this ground as well. And it will likely be, it will take longer than May 12th for us to refine that and bring that back, unless, Michelle, does that line up with your thinking?
Yeah, no, you're correct, Mr. Derricott.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, I thought I'd heard May 12th somewhere in the presentation there, but that makes total sense.
Initially, we had proposed that,
Okay.
but yes, we will be taking some further time to make sure that we're capturing all of the comments here this evening.
One last question, comment before we let you go, Councillor McFadden, you.
Yeah, more of a comment. So I appreciate the delay, because I think it was probably only a sentence in my comments, but just making sure we are in alignment with like the provincial regional plans, and then whatever the different watershed plans are really important. And I know that'll be some heavy lifting to go through and just take it through that lens. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate the extra time being taken for that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess that wraps it up. Thank you on behalf of council for that presentation. On to 5B, Bylaw 12, 2025. We have Southbow Landing Multifamily Land Use Amendment. Can I call Joelle Anacarico, Planning Services, to the podium, please?
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and members of council. I just want to do a quick introduction. Thank you for having us here today for this presentation. The purpose of this report and presentation, of course, is to request feedback from council on the revised land use amendment that's been proposed, as well as any additional information that council would like to see or request to be provided in future presentations by the applicant at public hearing and administration at second and third reading. So I'll hand it over to Joelle Anacarico for the presentation, and we'll return to answer any questions or comments that you have. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Deputy Mayor and members of council. This evening, I'm here to present Bylaw 12, 2025 for information, which is a land use amendment in Southbow Landing. This application is for an amendment to Land Use Bylaw 01, 2022. If approved, this will go on to inform decisions at the subdivision, development permit, and building permit stages. This application is for parcels located in the community of Southbow Landing, which is shown here at the south end of town. The community of Southbow Landing was included in the River Heights Area Structure Plan approved in 2011, and further planned through the Southbow Landing Neighborhood Plan, which was approved in 2015. The majority of the community was assigned land use in line with the neighborhood plan in 2017, with the exception of 3 parcels of land. Qualico Communities acquired the lands in 2022 and is now pursuing land use in line with the approved neighborhood plan as the next step before future development continues. The land use map from the Southbow Landing Neighborhood Plan shows the subject parcels as RM, which was the high-density multi-unit dwelling district in our old land use bylaw, and is now most closely aligned with the high-density residential district, or RHD, in our new land use bylaw. These areas were always intended for multi-unit dwellings and were planned to be so because of their proximity to the planned commercial area in the village center, a planned school site, and a future planned transit hub. These parcels were intended to contribute to the mix of housing alternatives within the community and were purposefully located to be in walking distance to services and amenities in the community. These lands are currently zoned urban holdings, shown in blue on this map, which is a holdings district for lands intended for future development and means that the parcels cannot be developed until the land use is amended. A land use amendment application for these parcels has been seen by council before. The previous application was originally seen by council in October of 2023 and was amended 2 different times in response to council and public feedback. The application was heard at a public hearing held over 2 nights in January and February of 2024 and was ultimately refused by council on May 13th of 2024. Our land use bylaw requires that an application for a bylaw amendment cannot be resubmitted for 6 months after the date of refusal. So in the interim, the applicant conducted more public outreach through the fall of 2024 before resubmitting in November of 2024 when the 6 months had passed. The application went through a mandatory circulation period through December and into January of this year and is now before you for information this evening. The previous application seen by council was originally proposing that the subject sites be changed to high-density residential in line with the approved neighborhood plan. After receiving feedback from council, the applicant amended the center parcel to be medium density rather than high, and then after hearing further feedback at the public hearing, made more changes so that all three of the parcels were within a direct control district that limited building height according to the distance from homes in the Willows. So the maximum height would have been 13 meters adjacent to the Willows and increased all the way to 25 meters directly adjacent to James Walker Trail. Through both iterations of this application, the applicant has heard and integrated public feedback to create the application now before you for consideration. In August to September of 2023, the original application was circulated for public feedback. There was a public open house held by the applicant in November of 2023 to gather resident feedback. The original application was adjusted in December of 2023 in response to feedback and then recirculated to gain further input on the changes. As previously mentioned, there was a public hearing held over 2 nights in January and February of 2024 before the original application was ultimately refused. Following refusal, the applicant held a series of engagement opportunities in the fall of 2024 to prepare for resubmission. These activities included launching a project website, leaving postcards and door knocking in the community to make residents aware of engagement, 2 in-person coffee chats and site tours on the parcels, a survey which received 114 responses, and an online open house. A full What We Heard report prepared by the applicant was provided in your report packages. The current application was again circulated to all adjacent landowners for comment in December and into January of this year, and the feedback of that circulation will be discussed in the future public hearing report. The feedback received through the previous application process and through the additional outreach fell mainly into the following themes. There were concerns over the residential interface and transition of development from the Willows to the new housing to the south, a desire for more pedestrian connection between neighborhoods, concern over building height between neighborhoods, concern over the difference in grade between the communities, concerns over privacy, and transportation connections and how new development would impact existing roadways. This application responds to the feedback received through both application processes. The residential interface has been enhanced by adding a 6-meter wide greenway to provide physical buffering and lowering the zoning to medium density across both sites, which includes housing typologies that more closely align with existing development in the Willows. To address connectivity, a new pathway has been added that connects into an existing trail system in the Willows. Building height is being addressed through the change to medium density zoning, which is in closer alignment to zoning at the south end of the Willows. Grades are being lowered as much as possible to reduce the disparity between the two communities. Privacy concerns are partially addressed through grades being lowered and buffering from the greenway, and will be further addressed at the development permit stage, where setbacks will help ensure that homes in the Willows and in Southbow are at minimum 18 meters apart. For access to these sites, the portion of James Walker Trail within Southbow Landing is planned for completion at the end of the construction season in 2026 and will be in place before further development approvals occur for these parcels. This map shows the materialization of all of these changes and the current application before you for consideration. As mentioned, the applicant is now proposing the parcels as residential medium density with an area of parks and recreation zoning at the top for a pathway between the Willows and Southbow Landing. The application only includes the 2 parcels shown here, with a third parcel further east from the previous proposal last year being included in a separate future application that will also be seen by council. This cross-section shows the proposed greenway with a 3-meter wide pathway with green space on either side. A chain link fence is being proposed at the rear yard of the future Southbow Landing lots to reduce effects of tunneling within the pathway and enhance safety, and the existing wood screen fence on the other side where the Willows lots are will remain. The value proposition on this slide presents a summary of how the proposed changes to land use in Southbow Landing compare with the current neighborhood plan. The proposed plan increases connectivity by introducing a new pathway connection. This also enhances the residential interface by adding a landscaping buffer between new and existing development. The proposal enhances land use compatibility by lowering the density of the new development, which will provide a gradual transition into Southbow Landing and includes housing typologies that more closely align with the height of existing homes in the Willows. Policy alignment remains unchanged as the proposal still meets the intent of the neighborhood plan by locating more density around the village center and meeting the minimum density in our MDP. Lowering the density of these sites to medium density will decrease housing diversity across the community, as it is removing 2 of 5 total sites that were originally planned for high-density housing in the neighborhood. The provision of open space will have little change with this proposal, as the greenway is not large enough for programmable space, but introduces more public landscape space into the plan than was originally contemplated. The application will have a slight negative impact on the asset management costs for the town, as the addition of an MR parcel with the pathway will add a space for the town's parks department to maintain. However, it is a small space and is a continuation of a pathway already approved within the summit. The municipal tax base would also incur a slight negative impact, as it is removing the provision of high-density housing on these 2 parcels, which is the most valuable residential housing form. Next steps for this application include first reading, which is currently scheduled for April 28th. It will then go through the required public hearing, which is proposed for May 12th, and then second and third reading will occur, which is currently scheduled for May 26th. Administration again wants to note that Qualico's portion of James Walker Trail is planned for completion by the end of 2025, with the town's portion planned for completion by the end of the construction season in 2026. These parcels will then need to complete subdivision, development permit, and building permit application processes before development begins. That concludes my presentation for this evening. I will now be again joined by Mark Krasinski, who will assist in answering any questions.
Okay, thanks, Joelle. We'll see if that generated any questions or comments. We have Councillor Nagel up first.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think it's wonderful to see the applicant has made a material change to their proposal in response to feedback. We had, I think, a couple hundred people at least reach out to the town and engage in this process negatively previously, saying that they didn't want to see the high density zoning. And that worried me because in my experience in council, it's typically when the community is unhappy with a development and we get to that public hearing stage, very, very rarely I see the developer or the applicant actually make a substantial change to address the community feedback, leaving me in the council position almost like mediating between the community and the developer, trying to figure out whose side to take, because it seems like you can't please both people. But in this instance, the application has been changed, and I think it's wonderful to see the community engagement be reflected in that way. And so I'll be happy to support this when it does come forward to council. So really like seeing the public engagement reflected in the changes.
Thank you, Councillor Nagel. Councillor Federico.
I also wanted to give my kudos. I think it shows a lot to take back the feedback, and it was a lot of hard criticism when this did come forward. I'm not going to make any opinion as of right now. I can't wait to hear the next round on the public hearing to get their opinion. And I want to say thank you for doing that, because we have seen other proposals that have come forward where changes have been suggested, but then there hasn't been that secondary public hearing aspect to it. It's just like, well, we've made the changes, we heard people, but then we don't allow them to actually speak to it. And so I'm really happy that you're allowing people to come forward again to revisit this, look at what you've changed, and then to be able to give their concerns back to council. I think it's really important. And if it's a first start of getting kind of that green light from me, is being able to have that continued communication with the residents. So I just want to say thank you for being able to take the time to do it, and also the fact that we're not going to be, and we can encourage residents that there's not going to be any sort of further development or building or people living there prior to James Walker Trail being completed. That's an important part of the discussion for them. So thank you.
Mayor Janung.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to maybe do the Reader's Digest of what I just heard. So essentially, if I'm talking to somebody on the street, this is what I would say. The previous application was for high density and allowed for 6 meters from the property line of the Willows to the building of a high density structure, which would have a maximum under our land use bylaw of 25 meters.
Through the chair, Mayor Junong, and that is correct. That was the initial application, the first application for high density.
Right. So now what we have before us is a 6 meter pathway, like a 3 meter pathway, but a 6 meter strip that then will act as a buffer, and then the 6 meter setback to a medium density development, which would have that has a maximum of 15 meters.
Through the chair, Mayor Junong, that is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So pretty significant change, which 2 of my colleagues have already spoken about. What I would like to see as part of the public hearing, an example of medium density that exists in Cochrane already. So people can actually see what it is that's being contemplated there. And I think there's multiple examples of that across the community, lots here in Sunset. I'd like to see a zoom out of the neighborhood so that we're not just talking about the 2, I know that that's the land use that we're contemplating, but what impact does the change of that have on the rest of the neighborhood that surrounds it? I think Joelle talked about it in her presentation about the other neighborhoods and the commercial, et cetera. I'd like to see like how they interface. And then the timeline at the very end was key, I think, to not just the process that we're going to be interacting with, but then subdivision development permits, so building permits. I think that bringing that back again as to like the first building and occupancy, the earliest that would be, the way I'm reading this, is 26, 27.
Through the chair, Mayor Junong, that is correct. 2026, 2027 would be the earliest we would see any built structures on the site.
Much like later than when James Walker Trail's built and et cetera, et cetera. So I just think those 3 items I'd like to see really clearly represented in the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Fedeko.
One last quick question, which I understand you might not be able to answer. I know this has to go through first reading and then we'll get a vote for a public hearing, but do we have an idea of perhaps when that public hearing may occur? Do we have any sort of dates?
Through the chair, Councillor Fedeko, we are currently intending to request a public hearing on May 12th.
Okay, thanks. I might have missed that, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I guess that just leaves me. I agree with the bench. I'd like to see this process actually working successfully where like residents that were going to be abutted by the proposal came and spoke their mind, and I think the developer has made some significant changes, and so I'd like to see what's going to happen during the public hearing. That's all functioning great. I did just want to make a quick comment on one of the administrative slides. Could we go back to the one about increases, decreases? Yeah, the value proposition slide, thank you. I do look forward to the day when we're looking at this, and I see here the down was the, where did it have it about? Broadening municipal tax base, I suppose, is what I'm about to riff on. When I look at some of the comments in the, and I think everybody knows where I'm about to go with this, but we look at, I was reading through you can read all the individual comments from the different public consultation areas here, and I get many variations as I read through it of things like, I don't like either option, very high density, and why can't there just be more single family homes? And what I continue to speak about, and I hope in an upcoming, perhaps the next council, we might be able to actually make intelligent financial decisions when we're talking about development, where I also like single family homes personally, but it would be great to be able to make decisions based on actual finances and see when a development is coming before us, what that means for the entire community. In other words, is it a solvent community that we're approving, or is it making everybody worse off because it is draining the town's finances? And I don't know the answer for this development, and we won't until we have some sort of financial metric to do so, but I just wanted to point out that the day that council actually has those tools before them, and the public too, to make intelligent decisions, I very much look forward to. And I wish I could answer that resident intelligently and say, this is the true either cost or benefit of the homes we're proposing and move forward with intelligent decisions. So I just wanted to use my moment on the soapbox to again say I'm excited to get to that future. We're all working towards it, I think, and I believe it is coming. So that's my only thought on this development proposal that wasn't brought up already. And it looks like that brought another light on. So Councillor Nagel, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in this value proposition slide, there's nothing here about community engagement or feedback. And in this instance in particular, I think if we did have a column or a row here for that, it would be a very, very big plus sign to the up. I know we can't always add that to this metric or matrix because it's such a discretionary thing usually, but in this instance, I don't think it's discretionary. I think it's very, very quantifiable. But yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thanks.
Yep. I agree, Councillor Nagel, and I also commend administration for having this value proposition slide. It's something we didn't have when we, I don't know, when I started on council, and I like the direction we're moving, where it gives you a way to evaluate as we make changes to different development proposals to actually see what's increasing and decreasing and make a smart decision. So thank you very much for the presentation, Mark and Joelle. On behalf of council, we appreciate it and have a good evening.
Thank you.
We only have one other thing on the agenda here. That's our closed session. Could I ask for a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
So moved. Mayor Janung, thank you. Or we have to have a vote to move into closed session, of course. All those in favor? Approved. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break before we go into